and capacity. Also have a process and capacity review underway in the Fire Administration Division, and a comprehensive review of the winter maintenance. So we'll get right into the Revenue Division. I'm going to cover a number of different topics today related to this. I'll take you through what the objectives and scope and methodology were for the review, and some of the key themes and findings that came out of it. I'll talk a little bit about the risk assessment and what the top risks were that came out of that. We also hired a third-party consultant to come in and do a lean review of the processes, so I'll take you through some of the highlights of that review. Talk about the org structure analysis that we did and the recommendations that came out of the review. So in terms of objectives, this is like any other comprehensive review where we look at everything, including the services that they provide, the inherent risks in their processes and controls, roles and responsibilities, and workload overall. And specifically with this review, we were looking at possible areas to improve their efficiency and effectiveness, areas to mitigate risks, and then a real large focus on their org structure, their roles and responsibilities, and their workload. And that was in relation to the new SAP installation that happened. So just making sure that those things were all in alignment with this new system that we had installed. So in terms of methodology, this is very similar to most of the reviews I do. This was undertaken by myself and Catherine Dever, and it lasted about a year, the entire review. We reviewed relevant internal and external documents for context, including the 2016 Employee Culture Survey results, among other things. We interviewed all 29 staff in the division, as well as a sample of 42 other internal clients or stakeholders, which included staff, management, and council. We then did a risk assessment that built on the input from staff and stakeholders. And we did some benchmarking related to organizational structure and processing volumes with other similar-sized municipalities as well as some utility companies. We undertook an organizational structure review with a specific focus for the streams of work and roles and responsibilities, the management structure, and the balance between supervisors. The review also included a workload and capacity assessment with a focus on the SAP workflow and balance between roles, and the temporary and long-term solutions to address the imbalances. As I mentioned, we had a consultant-led lean review where we looked at current state mapping to identify sources of waste in the processes, problem statements, and root causes. We then did future state mapping to identify and quantify potential solutions to those problems. We did some implementation planning, and we did one Kaizen, or rapid improvement event, to implement 4 of the identified solutions. And then finally, we did an assessment of the alignment of the division with the FCF service strategy. Not in scope were a detailed financial analysis, controls testing. So although we did ask about control weaknesses, we did not go into any depth in the testing. And we did not do an in-depth process review of every single process that they have in the division. Now I'll touch just on the key themes and findings before I get into the specifics of each part of the review. So we found that the revenue staff are very knowledgeable and that they strive to provide timely, accurate service, and that there's a very strong focus on customer service with their external clients or citizens. Staff have been very adaptable during a prolonged period of intense change as SAP was installed. The lean portion of the review identified an opportunity for more value-added work by implementing additional reviews using this approach. And there's a desire from internal clients for strengthened partnerships. It's also important to note, though, even though they're asking for these strengthened partnerships, that they do have empathy for the amount of change that the staff have experienced during the installation of SAP. So we heard some unique themes from the revenue staff themselves. First, regarding SAP, they felt that the training that they received when it was installed was felt to be inadequate for them to perform their roles. They also felt that communication from management was unclear around a number of items, including the status of some temporary positions at the time, the status of defects in the system, and the rationale for some of the decisions that were made. So all of these things led to some immediate actions that were taken by management to help address the communication issues. Heavy workload and backlogs that were due to increased number of transactions, increased number of defects in the system, and SAP requiring more steps to complete a process than the old system. There was input from staff that processes and roles really need to be redefined to align with how SAP works, and that they need to move away from doing things the way that they've always done them. At the time, so this was a year ago when we did these interviews, stress was very high and morale was low with staff. We also heard some unique input from the stakeholders or clients of their service. Primarily, they were looking for a greater level of partnership, which I mentioned before, which to them includes things like greater flexibility, more collaboration to come to mutually beneficial solutions, and building on some good examples of partnerships that already exist in some of the areas within the division. They observed that the staff vacancies at the time had resulted in some incorrect processes, longer wait times, and a lack of direction for staff. They also noted that pending retirements and the risk of knowledge loss when they leave are high importance to them. It's important to note again that the stakeholders really did have empathy, and they acknowledged the stressful environment and the SAP challenges that the staff were dealing with. So as with any comprehensive review, the input from the consultation phase was used to create a risk assessment. All of the risks were identified by staff and stakeholders were then rated by the management team in terms of the likelihood of occurring and the impact if they did occur. This is intended to assist revenue in proactively managing their risks in order to help them achieve their goals and become more effective. So from the risk assessment exercise, the highest risks related to, first of all, several staff who are eligible for retirement and the associated risk of knowledge loss when they leave. There's a few one-off roles that within the division that don't have backups or documented procedures, which has the risk of service continuity if the incumbents are absent or there's turnover in those roles. There's the risk that the old way of doing things and the existing org structure may not be sufficient to support the new SAP system in the most effective manner. And finally, change is not widely embraced and processes are not reviewed or updated regularly for efficiency. Now, however, this was kind of the state of affairs at the beginning of this review. I would say that as we've gone through the lean review, we've had a number of quick wins in terms of some process improvements, and from that, a number of other implementations underway. So I would say that there is a change in that culture underway. So I'll touch on the lean review highlights now. The goal of this part of the project were, first of all, to optimize our current resources to address workload and workflow imbalances, because we all know that we're not adding new staff through budget typically, so we need to make do with what we have and make the best of the resources. Another goal was to identify and implement some tangible process improvements, so not just recommend them, but actually get them implemented. And these would focus on decreasing the non-value-added time that they're spending in their processes, decreasing customer wait times on the phone, and improving accuracy rates. This scope included all three streams of revenue, so taxes, utilities, and miscellaneous billings, and it included the value stream from the point of setup of the customer account through billing, payments, collections, until the money was deposited in the bank. And we hired a consultant to lead us through this part of the review, as I mentioned, just in order to teach us, the review team and the staff, the lean methodology. We expanded our review team at this point to also include the service coordination and improvement managers and business analysts from the two other departments so that they could also learn these skills and then apply them to future service review projects. So the methodology includes a number of steps that are listed on the screen, the first being pre-work and planning, and this was just in terms of the scope of what processes would be reviewed and what the value stream start and end points would be. Data collection is related to gathering the frequency and the effort of all of the required process steps. Then the current state value stream mapping is mapping out each of the steps in sequence in order to identify areas of waste and quantify them. The future state value stream mapping is where solutions to eliminate or reduce waste are added to the process map. Kaizen, or rapid improvement events, are just dedicated time to actually implement some of the solutions that were developed in the future state mapping. And finally, a project debrief to identify what worked well and what could be improved for the next project. So the outcomes of this methodology were that, first of all, we classified all of the process steps in the value stream as either value-added, non-value-added, or necessary non-value-added. And we defined problem statements for the 14 areas where we had identified non-value-added tasks or waste. We then brainstormed, quantified, and prioritized solutions to the problems to help reduce or eliminate that waste. The solutions were prioritized based on the ease of implementation and impact. We identified 23 activities which, if implemented, would have a high impact, some of which would be easy, quick wins, and others which would require more effort and planning to implement. These high-impact solutions equate to approximately 1.5 FTEs of capacity across several roles based on our estimates of time that would be saved. We also created an implementation plan to identify the timing and responsibility for each of these 23 activities. As part of the engagement, we also got the consultant to lead us through what's called a Kaizen event. As I mentioned earlier, this means change for the better and is simply dedicated time to work on implementing one of the identified solutions. In our case, we were able to choose 4 of the problem statements and associated objectives to work on during the Kaizen event. So these included reducing customer wait times for pre-authorized payment calls to our customer service reps, improving the pre-authorized payment data accuracy, improving data accuracy from banks for mortgages, and improving consistency and productivity in billing adjustments. So the Kaizen event allowed some tangible improvements to be made. So first, with the pre-authorized payments, we now have some standardized business rules related to the process itself and processing times, which then allows us to create a document a decision tree and frequently asked questions for the customer service reps so that they could now more often answer the questions quickly without having to transfer to another staff member. We also redrafted the forms and the return envelopes for the pre-authorized payment application forms to eliminate a field that had previously requested account code information from the customer. We now require them to provide a void check or a bank form. This eliminates the data input errors by customers related to their banking information. Second was banking functions, where we accomplished documenting a required format for banks to send their information to us regarding mortgages and pre-authorized tax transactions. So this makes sure that everything is consistent and being done in a manner that will help us on our end. We also documented an improved standard process flow for this process. And third was the bill recalculations for utilities, which resulted in a detailed review and documentation of the process, which will assist us in cross-training for this one-of role and lead to more detailed process review for this complex function. So overall, our team thought that this lean exercise was a great success and something that will replicate in other reviews going forward. Staff also liked the methodology and the tools, and we're excited to see some immediate improvements being made. So I'll switch gears now and just talk a little bit about the organizational structure review. It was recognized early on in the review that the existing org structure was perhaps not optimal for supporting the work of the various roles within the division. There was also a number of other risk factors to consider as we started analyzing the org structure. So first, which is common to many divisions, is population growth as a risk to the division as workload grows with no associated growth in staffing. Second, the customer call wait times were analyzed by the lean consultant, and it was found that our wait times exceed the industry benchmarks for call centers. And although we did note that these benchmarks include all sectors and not just municipalities. It was observed that as a result of the SAP install, that some roles now had excess capacity while others were overburdened. There were a few different one-of roles, which I've mentioned, which were difficult to backfill in times of absence and turnover. And finally, the supervisors were performing several frontline tasks because staff didn't have the capacity for this work. So this led to several opportunities and ideas put forth by staff that can be summarized generally as ideas to create or combine functions, sections, or roles, creating capacity through the lean review to allow supervisors to delegate some tasks back to staff, and the opportunity to cross-train more staff more thoroughly to mitigate the risk of the one-of roles. So the project team and management worked through various models to arrive at a new preferred organizational structure, which was approved by Mr. Chapman in his time at the time in his role as DCAO. The new structure will address the capacity and workload issues. Unfortunately, we can't share it with you today as we have still some work to do behind the scenes before we can share it with staff. However, it will be rolled out in roughly the next 2 weeks or so. It achieves a more logical grouping of like roles, a better distribution of tasks, and mitigation of the one-of roles. And a full detailed communications plan to revenue staff will accompany the rollout of the changes at that time. So the review identified 13 recommendations which focus on the following themes: continuous improvement, accountability, communications, and internal relationships. One recommendation is implementing the Lean Action Plan, which has an additional 23 activities that I mentioned, which focus on fully understanding and documenting the processes and eliminating waste in our processes. It's also recommended that the division place a more of a focus on the FCS service strategy with an emphasis on partnering with other divisions. And it's also important for management to ensure accountability of staff to implement the process improvements and be sure to communicate those successes and also recognize staff that support the culture of continuous improvement. So are there any questions on this review?
Thank you very much. There are some questions for you. And the first one is Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you, Karina, for the work that's been done and for the review. One thing I was waiting to ask a question on, and you touched on it, which I'm glad that was addressed as well, or we're trying to address it, is the wait time for when customers call in to a revenue department. You said the wait time is above the industry average.
Yes.
With the data collected, can you shed some light? What's a typical wait time?
Sure. The industry average of all types of call centers is 3 minutes. Ours is hovering around 6 minutes, but a lot of that is driven by a number of long calls. So we analyze the calls further to say that there's 3 different types of calls that tend to be longer in length. One of those is being related to the pre-authorized payment plan. One of those is related to the new e-services, so technical difficulties that people have with that program, and then others with billing adjustments. So those are the 3 topics that tend to lengthen the call length. So that's why we did the 1 Kaizen on the pre-authorized payments, and we're going to do other Kaizens on the other 2. So if we can reduce those types of calls, overall the average call length will decrease.
I'll honestly admit I've had constituents call me or complain where they've called in and waited upwards of 20 minutes to half hour. And I've, hearing that, I've called myself just to kind of see if that's actually true. The call I made, it was about a 15-minute wait time. So I'm glad that's being looked at, and I'm sure that'll be addressed as part of the reorganization. One thing that we've always talked about is, especially now with the push of e-billing and all that, to educate our customers and citizens. Can some of that be done through front end, through community centers? Where they may be able to assist residents to sign up at the terminals that are there at the community center, the computers that are there already. Yep. Is that something that can be, reorganized that way to push some responsibility to the community centers? I'm not to sure field some of those inquiries at least.
I'm not sure whether the community centers have the technology at their workstations that they would necessarily be able to sign them up in the system for e-billing, but they could certainly direct them to the right spot and promote it. I think that's a great idea, and I think it's a great opportunity for partnering between revenue and community centers or pools or arenas or whatever the location is to try and cross-promote their services.
So as we endeavor to move in this direction, I hear you that they may not have the technology or perhaps some of the training, but we will look to see to utilize the resource that's already in the community there.
Yeah, I can pass that on to them for sure.
Perfect, thank you.
Councillor Netsky.
Yeah, thank you very much. Similar questioning on the benchmark. In terms of call waiting, I guess I experienced that, not out of the city, but no matter who you call in terms of you're trying to get some information. Is the call waiting time benchmark an issue of you call and say, thank you for your call, we're going to put you on hold, we're rather busy, and you got to wait like 5 minutes? Or is it that the phones are answered immediately, there's a question or two raised, and then you got to sort of find the answers to on your computer or your paperwork or whatever, and that's what drags it out? Is this one of those two combinations, or one or the other?
I don't believe the calls are answered until they're able to actually address your call. So I think you're in a queue waiting, and that is the wait time. And then the length of the call is then how long from when they pick up until when your call is resolved. So those long duration calls are what's causing the queue on the front end, because you're having to wait for an available customer service rep.
So that's the issue, is the front ending, the waiting while your music is playing in the background sort of thing, and you're waiting before you even talk to a live person, basically, right?
Yeah.
And the standard is 3 minutes. And so is it, do we not have adequate number of staff or to answer those questions, or do they go through the call center, or do these calls go directly to finance or the required person?
They go directly to finance. They have 10 customer service reps within the revenue division to handle these calls. And I would say that if we can tackle those 3 types of long duration calls, we don't need more staff.
So in your comment here on the pre-authorized payment, now is that only the one aspect of the long duration for the calls, or is there other issues that people just call with general inquiries or someone of that nature dealing with their billing?
Yeah, the 3 topics, like I mentioned, that are the bulk of the long duration calls are the pre-authorized payment, the e-billing, and then billing adjustments.
So one of them the pre-authorization is the one that takes the longest.
Those 3 categories take the longest, so they're all roughly equal. We chose one to start with, and that was the one that we did our Kaizen event for. There's definitely plans to address the other 2 types as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. So just going to the fact that there was some concerns around the training for SAP. That was a huge project and an extremely costly one. Do you have a sense now that staff are more comfortable with it? I mean, I know that you'll probably do a follow-up, but I'm a little bit concerned that this huge project has created maybe some divisiveness or some concerns within our staff about how well they were trained to bring that new program online.
Yeah, I would say that when it was first installed, there was a lot to learn, and that they were a little bit overwhelmed by the amount, and the training was parceled out so that they only learned what they needed to immediately to get going. Since then, they've been cross-trained on other functions within SAP, and just from talking to staff, they feel more comfortable with it now, and there has been additional training that has been added throughout the year. So,
okay. So you mentioned cross-training. I know some people prefer just to know their job and just do their job, but it does create a succession planning issue. So and you've mentioned this before, I think, in other audits about cross-training. Is this something that we're actually going to be sincerely looking at throughout the corporation? Because I am concerned. We do have a number of retirements, I think, in all divisions, that if they're just a one-role person and nobody has been trained for them or even can pick up the slack if their retirement happens sooner than later. Is this something we're really pushing for, the whole cross-training across the entire corporation?
I would say it's certainly something that I look for when I'm doing each individual review. I personally don't have any plans to do a corporate-wide program, but that is something that if senior management wishes to pursue, then it's something that we could look at.
I think it's really important for that whole succession planning for our corporation, and so the corporate leadership team is here hearing me. I think if we want to have that continuity, it is critical to our success as customer service people. The other question I had was related to the Kaizen event. This is the first time I think we've ever heard of this. Is this a new format? Is this something that you'll see us doing in other divisions as we do reviews?
Yes, so the concept of Kaizen is not new. It's been around for many, many years, since the 1940s, but it is new for us. It is something that, as I said, we got the consultant to train us in it so that we can then apply these tools and skills going forward when we do service reviews. So we do intend to roll this out corporately. We're in the process of planning what that might look like, and we'll be delivering it to senior management later this year just to get their input and direction. So
how do you see that this assists your reviews by doing one of these events? Or what do you see as the positive outcomes and maybe negative outcomes?
The methodology itself is kind of one level deeper than what I've done in the past, and it gets you looking at things through the lens of the customer. So you're looking at it from what is value add to the customer as opposed to what's value add to us as a corporation. So that provides just a different lens, and it opened my eyes to different types of wastes and different ways of looking at things, different ways of doing problem identification and root cause analysis. So those are all tools that we can use going forward. The Kaizen event itself, as being a dedicated time to actually implement solutions, was very valuable because people within the review got to see immediate results. It got them charged up to be able to want to do more and to keep going with the momentum. So I think in previous audits, where I typically hand over a set of recommendations, they may not get started on right away, or it may seem daunting to them, but if they can at least get a feel for how it would go to implement and realize it's not as difficult as they think it is, then I think that's a win-win for everyone.
So is it kind of breaking down the new processes or the new changes so that they're in sort of edible bites, that they can see their successes sooner than the way we did it in the past?
Yes, so the solutions are all very specific to individual types of waste that we've noticed at different points in the process. So when we did our implementation plan, we planned it out what logically needs to go first, what are some things that maybe require a lot more research or collaboration with other divisions. Those were maybe planned for a longer period of time or out in the future. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Karina.
Okay, Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Karina. I want to just ask a bit about the lean management techniques that you used. Is Kaizen part of that? Is it a... Yeah.
Yes, it's definitely part of that.
And so have you not in the past, can you remind Council, have you not in the past used some lean techniques for previous reviews?
Parts of it, but not knowingly. I mean, I did process mapping before and then looked for things where I thought that were inefficient. But this process is really, like I said, looking at it from the customer's perspective. It's involving all the staff, so it's them that are finding the areas of waste. They know their process the best. It's them that's coming up with the solution, so they're bought into it already and willing to implement.
Well, it sounds really exciting, and I'm glad to hear that things went well with your first experience with it, and perhaps your job would be a little bit less onerous if management teams across the corporation would be trained in how to implement it. And maybe not as deep a dive as what you would do in your reviews, but perhaps management could implement some of the strategies without your involvement.
Yes.
Is that possible, do you think?
Yeah, and that's part of what we're looking at when we roll this out corporately, is so who needs to be trained and who needs to be involved. But it's certainly not that myself and my project team are the keepers of this. We want to embed this across the organization so everyone is, it is continuous improvement. So it's not just a once and done. Once you've implemented your ideas and your solutions, you start again. You're at your new current state, and what else could be improved. So.
That's great. That's great. And Kaizen is a Japanese word, as I understand it. So that'd be good to make note of, just to give credit to, where the term came from. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. Councillor Davey.
Thank you for the presentation. I just had a quick question on with respect to the morale and the stress levels. Reading through it, I think you weren't totally explicit, but I'm wondering to what degree the transition, the timing of the audit in terms of the transition of SAP, which I understand is like once in a decade sort of transition, whether your sense was it was the timing that somewhat affected that.
Definitely it raised their anxiety level at the time, but it was the ideal time to do it because they were in such a state of change. They needed some assistance to help modify their processes to help support the SAP new system. So
Okay.
I would say anytime I come in to do an audit, there's always anxiety. So
Yes, yeah, it just seemed like, I don't know, kind of, when I was reading through it, I kind of felt like, I don't know, assessing how well my family functions in the middle of when we're moving. Not so good. The other question I had was the concern about staff that are at or approaching retirement. Could you give me an idea of like the impact? Like, is it, I'm not sure how many people are in the revenue division. Is it a significant number, or is it just a small number with high knowledge?
the ones that are close to retirement are in very specialized roles with a lot of specialized knowledge. So that's where a lot of the high risk is. And there are, I can't remember exactly the number, but there's a handful of them anyways. It's not just one person.
Okay. And last thing, just a comment, don't need a response, but in terms of the wait times as well, I'm not sure if we have the system in place, but one thing I found helpful with other private sector organizations is that option where if the wait time is going to be in excess of 10 or 15 minutes, you can hit a button and they will call you back when they have time in the day. So just a suggestion. Thank you.
There don't appear to be any other questions, and just, I guess, building on that last one, I mean, I don't know how new our ACR technology is, but it is something that we may want to look at updating, because I think that's one point, the one that Councillor Davey just made. But there's also the thing where it says, you're now caller 6, you're now caller 5. So at least there's that contact in between, so that you're not either listening to music or silence or I don't know, Dan Chapman doing a commercial for something, just that contact is there. That might help as well. Okay, moving on then to service review priorities.
All right, so it's that time of year again when we're starting to put our minds towards our work plan for next year. So this is really just to come and get your input before we put the work plan together. As you recall, last year we had refreshed the prioritized list of services, which is included in the appendix to the report, and we'll base our review plan based on the ones that are near the top of the list. Now, I will just bring your attention to, there are 3 items that were near the top of the list, at least the utilities one was, that were on this year's plan, which will carry over into 2018. So those will eat up some capacity. So there's not going to be a lot of room for new items this year. But I did want to draw your attention. We haven't forgotten about those items. We've just been busy. So those will probably start near the end of the year and continue into 2018. So we just wanted to open up the discussion here today to see, are there any services or audits that you would like to see considered in 2018, and just give a brief description of the driving reason why you'd like to see those reviewed. And then we can consider those when we put together our work plan, and we'll bring them back to you in December for approval.
Okay. So if people can refer, I guess, to pages 2-3 and 2-4, that's the current ranking as you see various audits. I know numbers 1 and 2 are planned for early 2018, and then the other information is really just when the last audit happened. And I see engineering in number 21 is planned for early 2018 as well.
Yep.
Okay. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. So I just have a couple questions about this chart. Why are the ones that have been completed within the last 4 years still on here? Is it because we need to look at them again, or is it just because they fit with the criteria that you listed them in?
So this is a complete list of all of our services on the business plan, and so when we did the rating last year, this is the order that they came out on. So these are just showing that, yes, we've already done a review, even though they were higher up in the list. So certainly in future years, I can take them completely off the list if that would make it easier to view it. I just wanted to show that we weren't missing any services, that they are on the list.
They're on the list, but so 60% of the weight for this list is risk factors or risk.
Yes.
How did you word it? And total risk score. So do we still have additional risk even in these highlighted areas that you think we need to look at again in this order, or I'm just confused about that.
Any of the dark gray items on here, I would suggest that we don't need to review anytime soon. They will always have risk within them, but the reviews were comprehensive enough that it wouldn't make sense to review them right now before going and looking at some other areas within the city.
Okay, well, that helps. And then something like emergency response in the fire department sounds like if that needs review, maybe like why wouldn't that be top? That sounds like that's a life or death situation. So can you help us understand
Sure.
where we're at?
It rates up high because their risk factors involved in their work are very high. That's not to say that they're not functioning properly or that they are inefficient or ineffective. I think in the past, before we did the refresh in 2016, they were much lower on the list just based on the way they filled out the survey the first time. They've gone to the top of the list, but I think last year when we were discussing the items to put on the work plan, we decided that there wasn't, although their work is risky, there wasn't a lot for us to review in how they fight fires.
Okay, so I guess the way our internal auditor defines risk might be different from, life or death type of risk. And so I'm just wondering if in future, if we can get a better sense of what type of risk we're looking at so that we can better give you feedback. I'm sure that I have confidence in your ability to prioritize properly. And you'd tell us if you felt like, hey, we've got some problems here, we need to deal with this right away. But it is helpful for you to give us context. Okay?
Yep.
And then just so in any of your reviews, have you ever found it useful to review not just the department itself, but the division or section, but how it interacts with another crucial partner within the corporation? So those lines of communication that can sometimes break down. If you see a risk there, do you sometimes follow that and really focus on two departments at once, even though you've been given your list that doesn't include that other partner? Am I clear?
Yeah, in the past, I would say I haven't. We've identified it from the stakeholder input to say, oh, you need to strengthen your relationship with X division. With this new lean methodology, it involves getting them right in the room. So when we did the piece of the process that involved utilities, we had utilities staff in there mapping it out with them and coming to an agreement on what the process should be. So I think going forward, it will be a lot more integrated.
That's really great. Thank you.
Councillor Netsky. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate this list of prioritized services that you have, and the shaded areas where you've done your work in the time frame, etc. I'm glad it's on the list, because this way, if you're thinking, if you eliminate it, then you're trying to think, well, what areas need to be examined. You may have forgotten that was already looked at 3 years ago. By having it here, you've already addressed it, and I really like that it's here. And the priorities that you've got listed here with no comments, there are in the order that you have it: fleet, aquatics, and fire, and then the other ones further down, 10, 11, 12 to 14. They'll be coming in that order in the next year or two in terms of your review?
Yes, so in the absence of any input from yourselves or from senior management in terms of priorities that you would like to see, we'll just start picking off the top of the list.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Mayor Brevanovic. Something that's not on this list, and I don't know what it would fall under. I don't know if it's something that we'd even do an audit on, but I'd be interested in finding out a little bit more about our events team here at the city. We do put on a lot of events, and we do get involved in helping others with their event. We don't do the planning ourselves, but there's a lot of coordination with bylaw, with fire, with police, with emergency services, with the AGCO. And there's quite a lot of work, and a lot of these events that our staff are at happen on the weekends. So, I'm concerned about maybe the number of hours that they have to put in, and, then they would have to have some time off during the week, which takes them out of the office. So, again, no, as you said, it's not that it's not functioning properly or it's ineffective. I think they do a great job, but with our neighborhood strategy kicking in and more events that they're needed to help out on, I would just want to make sure that they're properly staffed and supported.
Okay, I'll add that as a suggestion.
Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you. Looking at the list, two that would really pop up in my mind that I think would be beneficial to do in 2018. And to my understanding, we may have already be in the process of doing this, so I don't know if you can add some more clarity. With facility planning, like building management, maintenance, and repair, I thought we were looking at what that capital cost or future cost will be. If we're not, I think that would be part of that, a good review, especially the way it's laid out. So that's number 12. And I'll say this, why it's I think prudent for 2018, coming into new term of council, that'll be at the early part of next term of council when the findings will come out, and that may be a body of work that next term of council can take upon. Whatever the recommendations come from that structure. So.
Can you just clarify what the request is around that? So you said the capital planning for facilities.
So in number 12, the way it's laid out, it says it's facility planning, project and energy management, building, maintenance, and repair.
Okay.
So I'm thinking that would be a advisable review in the 2018 work plan. As I already gave my explanation, so that, what the findings are will end up coming more closer to the beginning of the next term of council. So any recommendations or changes, that's part of the work plan that the next term of council can take on. The other one would be for, and both or whichever it's more feasible to be able to do in 2018, would be for economic development. Again, I think there's a tremendous momentum that's happening through development and business opportunity that's coming to our area, especially right now. Looking at that division, seeing if they're properly resourced or how things can be done differently to maximize that potential current would be prudent. So I think it's more timely. So those would be my two suggestions.
Councillor Fernandez?
I had already marked the same as Councillor Singh on the facilities planning, and wondered if it would be tied in with sort of our asset management. If we understand buildings that may need greater repair or less repair, that might help build an understanding of our assets. The other one is actually, it's quite down on the list, but because we've already done CSD administration and CAO, and we've had a lot of changes happening in INS. I'm wondering if it might be worth doing an INS administration audit. That's it.
Okay, that appears to be all the ones from other members of council. I would ask you to consider taking a look at the parking enterprise. I think we know that in recent years the enterprise has financially done a lot better, just simply by virtue of the fact that there's been more demand on our parking utility. But I think when we compare it to some others, we haven't necessarily kept up with technology, whether it's the ability to use telephone and so on. For paying for your time at the meter, or to extend time at the meter, and also really looking at, are we being as creative as possible in terms of utilization, so that as pressures increase in the future, and we're starting to feel some of those already, that we're maximizing all of our revenue opportunities without creating the potential need to build any new facilities by the city in the foreseeable future anyway. I know, that's a piece of ongoing work that staff look at, but I think it might benefit from an independent set of eyes to take a look at that and have ultimately some revenue impact for us in a positive way as well.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you very much for your input. I'll take those under advisement, and we'll bring back a work plan for your approval in December.
Okay, thank you. That, I guess, takes us through the balance of the agenda. Correct? Yep. So, motion to adjourn. Councillor Fernandez, Councillor Marsh, all those in favor, opposed, that's carried. And we will be starting the next piece in about 10 minutes.